Okay, hello everyone. Today I'll be showing you how to make this neat little animation in JavaScript and CSS. Since Diwali is coming soon, we thought of doing a tutorial on making a Diya, which is uh, very festive. So I'll be going through all the code that I've written to make the Diya animated and also the page responsive. So this will work at multiple layouts. If we make the screen smaller and if we make the screen bigger, the Diya will remain the same. So I'll walk you through the entire coding process of writing everything in HTML, then CSS, and also a little bit of JavaScript. There's really not much of JavaScript involved in this because essentially all we need JavaScript for is just this button, which has a pretty simple logic. I'll explain that in a bit. First off, we can take a look at the HTML file. So, if you go to my account, you can follow along as well. I've made a little template, this one. I'll put it in the chat. Yeah. So, in this template, we have the HTML file ready. So, as we all know, what the HTML file essentially is the skeleton of the entire project that we are going to make. And it's pretty simple since this is relatively small and has very little components as a whole. So, first of all, uh, as you can see, this is a customized font and there's a gradient on it as well. So we create a div with a class name and we enter Diwali Diyas. After that, there is a class of fire on, which will essentially uh, be checked by the JavaScript part of our code to see if the Diya is lighted up or not. Then there is a div for the switch. The switch has a little circle. And as you can see, when we click the switch, the animation isn't completely linear. It bounces back a little bit. So when we get to that part in the CSS file, I'll explain about Bezier curves as well and how you can essentially tailor your own animation very minutely in a very easy way as well. Then there is a section center which holds the fire part, the smoke part. The smoke part is when the diya is not lighted, the smoke coming out. So that's the smoke part. And as you can see, there are multiple components there. So they are all the part of a span, which will become clearer once we get to the CSS part of the code. Then comes the design of the diya, which is stored in a container div class. The container has a little circle and all the lines that are a part of the design. So that's the basic skeleton. That's pretty easy to declare. So how about we jump into programming the CSS part now? Let's do that. Yeah. So first of all, as you can see, customized font, we import it from the Google API. The font is called Dancing Script. You guys can check it out here. And importing a font is pretty easy. You just import URL this, and then you can set it as a font later on. So what I'll do is I'll keep the HTML file open at the bottom as well, so you guys can follow along what part we are essentially styling as we are changing up the CSS file. So yeah, first of all, the main part is the body part, right? Since all the divs are inside the body part. So let's style that first. Everything in the body part is pretty basic. First of all, width is 100%. Overflow is hidden. Uh, we'll get to see the point of overflow hidden later on. Then the height is units. And background, yeah. So the background part, as you can see here, the background part we'll be defining first is this one, which is essentially just black. It is a gradient, but it isn't as clearly visible as the bright part, right? So the bright part will only be visible when the Diya is lighted. So for now, let's declare the background for this part. And what we can do is we can define a linear gradient from essentially a dark gray color to black. Yeah. So if we save that, yeah. So we have this, just a linear gradient for now. Let's move on to the next part then, the fire on part. So in the fire on part, the gradient has changed. There's a yellow gradient now. So let's try that. Yeah. So position will be absolute. And yeah, as you can see, Ghostwriter, which is Replit's AI, is already recommending me the code that I might want to write on basis of what I've already written in the body. So it is pretty close. As you can see, if I press tab, it shows this. Is I just need to change the linear gradient part to the colors that I want. So let's see. We want a nice yellow and a darker shade. Yeah. Also, if you want to change up the colors in any way, you can just click on the color and you can hover around and see which one you really like. Anyway, yeah. So the next important part is the z index, and we'll have it 1 here. So what this z index concept is essentially, the lower the z index, the lower the styling is on the stack. So essentially, if there is an object and it overlaps with another object, so the object with the higher z index will show on the top. So since this is the background, this has to have a lower z index. And the Diya, for example, that we define on the top will have a higher one. After that, we define the transition, which is an important part of the animation. We'll need it happen in 1200 milliseconds. We'll make it linear. And the transition is essentially this. The changing in color that happens, it isn't just a direct shift in the color. It sort of blends in, as you can see. And the transition just does that pretty simply if we define it as linear. We can also define it as ease in and out, but that is more suited for buttons really. And I'll show it to you in the form of Bezier curves a bit later. Anyway, Then, yeah, let's configure the name now. Since we can see the name, but it isn't clearly visible. Since the background is black and the font is small, we haven't really done anything yet. So let's do that. The position will be absolute, and we see again Ghostwriter is recommending what it thinks is right. So here is another important concept. So the translate part is very important in CSS. So here you can see I've done 0 and 0%. Now the thing is 0 and 0% mean completely different things. So this is the X value and this is the Y value. So 0 means essentially the first position in the X value, while 0% means uh, from the middle, 0% of the width is added to the object. So I can show you an example of that once I complete this part of the code. But both of those are very different things. Since the 0 begins at the start of the element and the 0%, the percent symbol essentially defines how much of the width are you adding to the translating property. So yeah, let's go left and minus 50% since we want it to be in the middle, and width 100%, we want it to be big. Opacity is 1. Then the Z index for this one will be 2 since we want it over the background. So if it has a higher Z index, uh, even if it collides with the background, which it will be the one that is shown to us and it won't be hidden from us. Font size, let's set it to in line height. So this one isn't completely necessary, but in this case, since it is a cursive font, a bit of it gets cut out if you don't define the line height to be a little bit bigger than usual. Then we define the font family, which is the dancing script, and we want cursive. Then the font weight, which essentially just defines how bold the font is going to be. If the weight is very low, then it will be very thin. The weight is high, and it will be much bolder. We want the text to be in the center, aligned by the center. The background will have a linear gradient from, see, yellow to a darker shade of yellow. And now, as you can see in our final text, even the text has a gradient, which is more clearly visible when there's a black background. It starts off at a very light yellow and it moves on to a much darker yellow. It looks like a very nice gradient. So how do we do that? The gradient within the text, not just the background. So we use the WebKit extensions to have the gradient on the text as well. WebKit text fill color. As you can see, Ghostwriter is recommending me the right thing. Transparent. If we run this now, there you go. We can see this. And let's say remove that. Yeah. The text is shown here. Right. Yeah. So if we don't have the fire on part, we can see how the text looks with the black background. We have the fire on part, and then there will be a nice yellow gradient that we've just configured. Okay, then we can define the switch. Now the switch needs to be a bit near the bottom, and the switch has two parts. One is the little circle inside the switch, and the other is the container holding the circle. So we'll define both of them, and I'll show you how to animate that really nicely as well. So first, let's define the wrapper for the switch. As you can see, there is a switch wrap class, then there's a switch class, and then there's a circle class. We start at the top, position absolute, top 50%, left 50%, and Z index, let's set it to a really high value, since we always want the switch to be visible, right? There you go. Let's see what of this we actually want. Yeah. And set the margin of top to be 200 pixels and the transition and linear. That's all for the switch wrap. But the interesting part is switch and the circle part. So we want it to be small, relatively small. We want the cursor to become a pointer there. As you can see, when we go near the switch, it becomes a pointer. When we are not touching the switch, we have a normal cursor. So the pointer denotes that we have something clickable, right? So you can do that pretty easily. And now is the transition part. Transition all 0.4 seconds. And we want to put a function here. We don't want it to be a linear transition, right? I'll show you. If it is linear, I can show it to you here. We go and change this cubic Bezier transition to linear. How it looks, I'll show it to you. See, compared to this is a much cleaner transition. Now, how do you come up with this function exactly? Let's see. If we go here to a web page, let's do inspect element. Inspect the switch and the circle part. Here we can see there's a clickable cubic Bezier curve editor, and the Chrome DevTools has a really nice and intuitive user interface for this as well. And it shows you a nice animation of a ball to help you understand how it's done exactly. So if, let's say, we wanted to start quickly and then do that. So as you can see, the ball goes here, slows down, and then goes fast again. We wanted to slowly ease into it like this, we can do that. So just imagine this as being the switch, right? It goes like this, slowly. Starts off fast and then slowly falls into place. And thing is, we have a couple of defaults here: fast out, linear in, ease out. Or if you don't like any of those, you can just make your own, like this. It's pretty intuitive. and what you want, you can just copy it from here, and then we go to a file, replace linear with this. So if you actually want to learn more about Bezier curves, I've included a link in the description to help you understand what the concept is actually about. And it's actually quite intuitive, the mathematics behind it is quite interesting, and the video explains it in a very animated way. It's even if you don't have a nice mathematical background, I'm sure you'll be able to understand the intuition behind it. Anyway, so let's try and complete the switch. So we'll have a nice animated switch part at least before adding the diyas. So now we finally define the switch. We want the width to be 60 pixels, margin 0 and auto, bottom 10 pixels. And thing is, you don't really need to worry about the exact pixel values as much as you need to understand what they essentially do. Since if you know what they do, you can just change the value yourselves and pretty much understand how it's done and make whatever you want yourself. There will be a border radius since we want it to be curved like this. We don't want it to be a square. Then the background, CF 100. Position will be relative. Display inline block. Another thing is, if you're having a bit of trouble with the CSS part, like you're setting a display and you don't know whether to set it as a flex display or a block display or an inline block display, the only thing you need to refer to is the official Mozilla CSS docs. So let's say we want to see the display docs. It shows you what display does. It shows you all the properties that it has, the group values inside the flow root, table, flex, grid. And if you want to understand Flexbox completely, you can just click on that. And it has a lot of examples and has everything in detail. So instead of just, let's say, going on Stack Overflow or something, if you want a more concrete way of understanding everything, always go for the official docs. They explain everything in as much detail as it's needed. Anyway, so we have the background display set, and we'll just move it, slate 5 pixels. And the last part is the circle. Ghostwriter already understood what we are doing and recommended it to me. Margin top needs to be 5%. Margin left needs to be 5% as well. We're making a nice little circle. And if you're wondering, why am I writing 40% now instead of the pixel values, instead of being exact like I was being in its parent class? So the thing is, if you're writing in percentage, what it is essentially is the percentage of the amount of its parent class. So if you've already defined a pixel value in the parent class, if you define the width to be 40% in its child class, that is the circle class, then CSS will automatically understand what you're trying to do. Border radius 50%, and we could use a nice shadow, say RGBA. Let's copy the RGBA values since we want them to be exact, right? And the background, Be a nice light color. Right. So given that, we don't have it yet, since there is a switched property that is also important, and we will code that out now. Border color, and we use the important exclamation important here. So the thing is, if we use that, it overrides any other values that we have previously defined. When it is switched on, we need it to be this color, even if we have defined something else at some other place. So it is essentially used for overriding. We want this to be important as well. We have that. And lastly, we can do switched circle and margin left to be 55% and background to be same as what we defined here. Yeah. So we have that. Yeah. So let's go over the code once more, just to make sure we are all on the same page. So the switch starts from the switch wrap. We have the position to be absolute, top and left, Z index. We transform it like this. And we have a margin, we have a transition, simple stuff. Then switch and the circular part, we define the height, we define the cursor pointer, and we define a Bezier curve for its transition. And we have a typo here. Switch. There you go. Now, as you see, when we hover over it, a cursor turns into a pointer. But if we click it, nothing happens here. Yeah. Why is that? We'll get to see that a bit later on, since that's what JavaScript handles essentially. So moving on. Now let's work on the fire part. So the fire part, uh, it has a lot of components, because there's only one thing that's important really in the fire part, and that is the main flame, right? Everything around that essentially has the same shape. Even the thing inside that has the same shape. And if we define the shape of one flame, we are essentially done, since the rest is just a shadow, and the child flame inside it is just a smaller part of it with a different color, right? So the fire part is pretty simple, but it has a neat little animation, which I'll go over, and also how to work with, say, the spans. It has 3 spans, right? Which we defined. So it will be used to define what we have defined in fire, but slightly edited some parts, sort of like inheritance in a general programming paradigm. So we'll define the animations for both the flame and the child, and then we'll define it for the smoke as well. So the fire part starts out pretty simple, all the usual stuff. Position is absolute, and Z index, we can set it to something big, since the background is just 1 and 2, so it doesn't really matter. We define the width, margin from the left. We want it to be in the middle, right? And we can have a border of 10 pixels. We want it to be solid, RGBA, and the thing is, fire will be in the parent class of the section center. So the percentage of the left and things like that will be defined on the basis of the section center. So we'll define that in a bit as well. The transition will be in 1200 milliseconds. We'll want this one to be linear. Transform, we want it to be a little bigger than what we defined, 1.5. Let's do that. Then the section center part. Yeah. So the position of this one will be relative. If you want a site to be responsive, width, let's set it to be 400 pixels, height 400 pixels as well. And essentially, since we are making a circle, we'll want the width and height to be the same. We want it to be in the middle of the screen. So let's define that. And as you can see, we have a nice little border as well. So a neat little trick for defining a border without getting involved much with colors is if you just want a darker shade as a border, what you can do is 0, 0, 0, and that's black. And just set an opacity to like 0.2 or something. So the background will be the color in the background, but the border color will be the color in the background, but with a slightly darker shade, since uh, the RGB value is black, but the opacity is a little low. That's the idea. Border radius is 50%, making a circle. Z index is 5, which is more than the background. Background color is do that. Transform, translate to the middle, do that. And we have the fire inside it. And there we have it, nice circle for our Diya and fire to go. Then we can define the part inside the fire, which is the actual fire itself. The span will be holding the properties and colors of the fire that we want. So let's see, position absolute, yes, ghostwriter is right. And the pixel values in this, I've set them to be a little exact, since we want them to be in a certain position in regards to the Diya. So yeah, I'll just put those in. And all the other stuff for the fire is pretty simple, so I can just explain it in a bit. We can see the border will be in a orangish yellow color. The radius will be 50%. The top left radius will be 0. That's the important part. And the animation will be this animation that we'll be defining. The Z index will be more than the background, and there will be a transition once we turn the flame off. So the animation part as well, if we put that in and we run this code, you'll see this. So it's not exactly in the middle for now, but you get the idea that if we remove this, yeah, can see the difference. So moving on to the animation part, which essentially changes the values of the shadow of the flame. As you can see, the shadow grows and then gets lowered down again, and then grows again and then lowers down again. So it's a pretty simple animation. But if you look closely, you can see the radius of the flame flickers a bit as well, just as Diya flames in real life. So to emulate that, we have this part of the animation, and to emulate the shadows, we have this part of the animation. All of it's pretty simple, so I'll just explain it to you. So first of all, we uh, define the shadow parts, and I'll just show you. We remove these. Why we have three of them? See, without them, there's just this. And if we remove this one, we just have this. So the most important part is this, the part that protrudes out in the box shadow. So what we are doing here essentially is we are varying the sizes of the shadow, right? We do this way. You can see it like this, but that's not what we want, right? We want it to look like this, to have all the parts functioning together. So first of all, we have this value which grows to a bigger value at 50% of the keyframe. So what exactly is this 0%, 100%, 50%? These are the keyframes of the animation. As we can see, we set the animation to this one that we are defining, and it's of 2.5 seconds. It alternates back and forth, and it is infinite. These are the properties of the animation. And what happens at 0%, when the animation is just starting, at 0th second, the box shadow will have these properties. At 50%, so that will be 50% of 2.5 seconds, the box shadows grow. And at 100%, which essentially warps back around to 0%, the box shadows will go down again. So that's how we achieve the animation of the shadows. Now the thing is, the shadows are fine, but what if we want to make the flame inside flicker a bit as well? So for that, we added the border radius property. Since uh, the border radius is the main thing that defines the shape of the flame, and the top left radius, we just change it a little bit, as you can see on the top. And here, since we want it to be a flicker and not really a very slow animation, we set it to 0, 22, 62, 100, 14, 56, 89. So it sort of flickers through. And if you're wondering, 0% to 50%, how does CSS automatically understand that it needs to go from this value to this value in this much amount of time? So the idea behind that is just like simple linear interpolation. If you have an x and you have a y, and you have to go from x to y in a certain amount of time, you can define a function yourself to essentially output the values from x to y at a certain point in time. And that is exactly what CSS does as well. And so we can pretty much make nice and clean animations. Next, we can define a child. As we can see here, it has a small yellow flame inside it as well. And what that is essentially is this. We go for a span, the nth child, second one. So the nth child selector matches every element that is the nth child of its parent. So we want only that span, and we don't want to define this property for all the spans. So for this one, we want the color to be different, and that is a lighter shade of yellow. And we want the animation to be a different one as well, right? So in this one, we don't really want the shadows. So if we just run it as it is now, since the shadows are 0 anyway, yeah. For this one, we only want the flickering, since the shadows won't really make sense, since it's already inside the flame, right? So we have this for now. We have the nice flame. And after this, we just need to define the smoke. And the only tricky part of this is defining the animations of the smoke, since there's a lot of them. If we turn it off here, as you can see, there isn't just one flame in the smoke. And we can see that in the HTML file as well. There are 9 classes in the smoke div component, since the smoke just keeps coming out and coming out. So we want an infinite animation of a component that goes up slowly, its opacity gets lowered, and then it happens again and again and again after a certain period of time. So first of all, uh, defining it would be easy, since uh, we just want to essentially define the same thing as we did in the flame, but we want it to be black, right? And then to define the keyframes, what we do is, as you can see, there's part of the smoke going to the left, there's part of the smoke going to the right. So we separate those keyframes in the following way. We define the keyframes to the left and the keyframes to the right. And we give some part of the smoke the left and some part of the smoke the right. So the code in this is pretty simple really. At 0%, the scale is this much, and we are at 0, and we rotate it to minus 45 degrees, which is to the left a little bit. And the opacity is 1. At 0, the opacity is 1 isn't written, since that's the default value essentially. At 10%, it is 1, and it slowly lowers down, as you can see. At 60%, it's 0.6, and it lowers down to 0 at 100%. As you can see, it slowly goes down. And we translate it up and up and up. Here in the leftward direction, we make it go left. As you can see, from 0 to minus 10 to minus 20. And in right, we make it go from 0 to 10 to 20. And it goes up in the similar way. The rotation is the same, and the opacity decreases as we go along. And the next part is defining how the animation property is inherited by all of the smoke parts, which is very simple, but you have to do it for every single smoke component. So for the 0th one, first one, second one, third one, stuff like that. So as you can see, we give the 0th one left, then right, then left and right, and left and right, like that. All of the animations are infinite, and the animations run for 7 seconds. And if you're wondering how the animation property in CSS works, first we define the name of the animation, then the duration, then the timing function, the delay, then the direction. We haven't defined the direction and the fill mode, stuff like that. We have instead defined we want the animation to be infinite. So the 0 second and the 0.7 second, 1.4 second, as you can see, that's the delay part. How much delay there is. As you can see, all the smoke doesn't come out at once. It's the delay that makes it look a little realistic. So after that, the flame part is almost done. And after that, I'll show you how to write the code in JavaScript with jQuery to essentially make the switch actually function, to see how the flame turns to smoke and the smoke turns to the flame. So now that we have that, we can define the ending part of this body fire off and fire on. The opacity is 0, the WebKit transition isn't exactly needed. The center needs to transition if there is a change. The box shadow, the smoke has opacity 1. When the fire is off, there's a transition delay. When the fire is off, then the fire part, the fire span, we transform it to a scale of 0, 0. So the scale of 0, 0, as you can see, here the scale is normal, 1.5, 1.5, as we defined initially. But when we turn it off, it slowly gets smaller and smaller until we can't see it. So that's what this part is essentially. When the fire off state is reached, the scale should be 0. So as you can see, right now the switch doesn't function since the JavaScript part hasn't been written yet. And we can see the smoke here. Now what we can do to fix this is we can go and write some JavaScript. Right. So the JavaScript function is pretty simple. It's basic jQuery. And you don't really even need to know the languages to intuitively understand how you can do this. I'll just show you guys how to do it. Yeah. So we have the switch component, right? And we want the state to change when we click the switch component. So switch on, click, we run a function. And here we can run an arrow function as well if you guys know that. But let's go for some classic JavaScript for now. So here we need to check if the fire is off or if it's on. So if we see that in the body, it has a class called fire off. If the fire off class exists, then we remove that class, fire off, we do remove class, and from the switch as well. From switch, we remove the class of switched, since the switch is now in its original state. It hasn't been switched. And as you can see, I write dot switch, since dot switch is the class name. And body is just the tag that is built in, right? So from this, we remove the switched part. And the else part is also very simple and intuitive. As you can see, Ghostwriter has already understood what we are trying to do here. And what it's suggested is exactly what we wanted to write. Otherwise, instead of removing the class, we'll just add the class, right? That's exactly what we want to do. And as you can see, the flame goes away and the smoke starts coming up. But there is an issue with the placement. That's obviously just a simple value issue which happens all the time, especially if you have 300 lines of code in. So if we do that, yeah, that should work. Before moving on to coding out the Diya design. So that's where the main part of the competition comes in. Since the competition that we'll be having will be about who can create the best Diya design. And that is actually the simpler part, since uh, essentially all the important CSS topics have been covered in making the flame, right? We tackled the animations, we tackled how to have different properties for the child spans based on the parent properties of a div class. So the hard work is already done, but now we just need to define the Diya. So the Diya is essentially in its own div. We call it container. You can call it Diya as well. Yeah. So the container needs to be a semicircle, right? So let's see. We define a width, we define a height, and the z index we define as a really big value here, since we want the Diya to be on top of everything. The background of the Diya, uh, uh, in case you get confused with like the background here and the background in general, you can see we are defining the background for the container class only for now. And the container class is essentially its own entity. So if you set a background for this, the background will be set only for the container class. Then we define the border radius 0, 0, 200, 200, since we want it to be a semicircle. The position is relative, overflow is hidden. Overflow is hidden, that's a very important one, because I can show you why here. In the finished product, we can see we have these lines, which are the part of the design, right? And we can see that all these lines are constrained inside the Diya, and none of them are leaking out. And that's very important. So what we can see is, if let's say we remove the overflow hidden part, right? Now you will see that the lines are leaking out of the Diya. We can see the lines are coming out. They aren't held inside the Diya anymore. But if we do overflow is hidden, then whatever part leaks out as well, that part won't be shown to us, that will be hidden. So that's exactly what we want here. The left is 27% to have it essentially right below the right below the flame. Uh, I check these exact values, the transform, and then the translate to make it be right under the flame. Then there are different parts in our design: the circle, then the lines, three lines, three lines, three lines. You might be wondering, uh, why are there so many lines? The circle is obvious, right? This is the circle right here in the design. But the lines, there's one line here, then there's a diagonal line, and then there's another straight line here. And all these are right besides each other, and there's a little gap below each and every line. So, I mentioned before the display part. How do you know if it's meant to be in flex or block mode or anything like that? So here we want the lines to have a display flex. since these three lines are right next to each other. So flex is the right part in the display property here. We define the circle part is pretty intuitive. We have the same width and height, the border radius 100%, we have a background, we have a margin top, margin left to give it a position. Then, as you can see, we have a line container part before all the lines. Since we need to define some basic general properties for the lines to be in. So the main importance of having something like a container class when you have multiple lines is that instead of deciding the location of each and every line, you can essentially have a black box which generalizes the location of each and every line in a container. So you don't really need to worry about where each and everything exactly needs to be. So I can show that to you in a very intuitive part. Here if we see, first of all, we set the line container, then this is a very cool command. At first glance, if you just started learning CSS or if you are new to web development, you might be very confused as to what this one does. But the as you can see, there is a greater than or less than, depending on the way you see it, symbol here. That essentially selects only those elements which are the direct children of a parent. So the parent here is the line container, and we want its direct children only. So, and this not first child part. This selector is used to select every element which is not the first child of its parent element. So, for those, only those, we want the margin top to be 10 pixels. As you can see, there is a little space between all the lines, right? So, for these lines only, we want the margin top to be 10 pixels, not for the first child. We want this property to hold for every child except the first child. Then the display properties flex, since they are right next to each other, right besides each other. Then we define the line 1 to have a width of 100, height 16, background this. The line 2, as we can see, is slanted slightly. So we define it with a skew y of 33 degrees. So it's a little bit turned on the y-axis. And in the line 3, it's again a straight line, right? But as we can see, because of the skew, it needs to be translated a bit up. So with that, we have the entire design ready. And as you can see, the animations work as well. All the transitions and animations that we have written out were all quite intuitive. And I hope that you understood all of the parts of the complicated CSS that were working together to create this nice little animation. Since, after breaking it down, it's all quite simple. Nothing is essentially complex in this, even if the code is 400 lines long. It's all very simple. The animations are very intuitive, and the movement of the sphere is also intuitive, since we know that we can essentially tailor it ourselves with the cubic Bezier curves in the Chrome DevTools. I hope you all understood how to open this as well. I'll explain it once again, just in case someone wasn't able to follow that along. First, you press Ctrl-Shift-I to open an inspect element. Then you press this to inspect an element in the page. You click that. You select our little switch. You open this and you go to the circle part, right? And in the style component of the circle, we have defined the transition, right, of the circle switch. And here you can click this to essentially tailor your own cubic Bezier function. And to understand how it will feel like, you can see this little ball animation like this. It will go slow, then it will go fast. And you can copy this and paste it in the animation part. Instead of linear or ease in and out, you can have your own custom Bezier function. Other than that, yeah, that's it. Really looking forward to seeing what Diya designs that you guys come up with. I think the basics that I've taught you today, with the lines and the skew, and how to have a nice container for the design that you're making, and how to make the semicircle Diya with any background that you want. You should have a pretty good foundation to start from for making your own Diyas. And remember to submit your Diyas with the hashtag Replit Diwali Jam to enter the contest, and the winners will get free hacker plan subscriptions for 3 months. And yeah, that's it. Uh, Happy Diwali to you all, or at least it will be soon. Thank you for watching.